자마자 10분 독서하도록 하겠습니다. When Gawain established through the courthouse window, flew high above the town on great wild wingstrokes, he looked back below. From the height of the free sky, the king and the crowd gathered around in the courthouse square looked like a frenzied insect. Gawain resolved to get away from them as far as it possibly could, flying over like a superb who welcomed the coolness of the open air and vista of the wide forest-bordered waters. But he was a tired goose after his recent ordeals, and he soon used up the energy provided by his anger. When he had crossed the lake, he could go farther, and he dropped into the open space in the woods. He rested against a hickory tree, breathing heavily and sensing his new surroundings. He had been in many places before, in his forest and in others, but he had not been in this particular spot. It looked strange. It also looked familiar, because it was just a place in a forest. He had not eaten the poor fare offered him in prison, and he was hungry, yet too tired to forage for food. He found a bed of rhododendron burrowed under the leaves and fairly well concealed. He fell asleep. When he woke in the morning, he was surprised to see the rhododendron leaves above him. He quickly got his bearings, pretended his feathers from force of habit, and went to look for breakfast. He moved warily by the edge of the lake, since he knew he would be hunted. He found some worms to eat, some tender shoots of forest plants, and some succulent bugs. Realizing that he must be careful not to leave tracks, the tide rushes to his webbed feet, and walked about obliterating the imprints he had made in the damp soil at the margin of the lake. As he wandered clumsily in his strange shoes, he thought about the past few days, especially about the day of trial. He was sick at heart. He felt he should take off again, continue on his way to some far place, but he was too depressed for such an undertaking. In the woods, he came to a cliff, and he found in the side of the small entrance to a rather large cave. There was light in the cave, because high above the entrance was a fissure in the jagged rocks that formed a very narrow open window. Gawain decided to make his cave his home for the time being, until he was sure exactly what to do, where to go. This decision made, he got easy. With a stick and a flat stoner for tools, he dug up some bushes and cleverly planted them in front of the entrance to his new home, so that it would be almost impossible to see. He covered the newly dug earth with dead leaves. No one was likely to notice the narrow window because of some position, and because from below it looked like just a rather crack in the rocks. By lashing logs and sticks together with pliable vines, he managed to make a crude chair and table. He had a home, and he felt sure that the search parties of the king, who were already looking for him in the forest, would not find it. Gawain took up the life of a fugitive and a recluse, with only himself for company. Much as a swimming gave him comfort, he would wait for night, when there was little chance of his being seen, to swim in the lake. He wore the rushes on his feet when he walked, and searched quickly and furtively for food. almost hurrying back with it to his hidden cave. He avoided making fire, though he often wanted the warmth of one and knew how to rub two sticks together until they ignited. Mostly he stayed in the cave, and he spent his time there brooding, savoring his miseries. He recalled his one-time friends, remembered their looks, their voices, their ways, the warm feeling that had existed among them. However, could they have turned on him, believed him a criminal? Even if the evidence did seem to prove it, how he had admired the king. Hadn't he agreed to guard the king's treasure only out of love? Weren't there millions of things he would have preferred to do? Where was King's gratitude? Gratitude? Love? Loyalty? Friendship? What did such things mean to them? Sifting his bitter reconciliations, he often wept with his head on his wing at his rude homemade table or stared at the damp stone walls. Sometimes in the middle of the night, in the darkness of his secret cave, he woke up in tears. No, now he knew. Even they had ever sincerely loved him, they would have realized it was impossible for him to steal, lie, or cheat in any way. When he was extremely young, a gosling, he had lied in a small, inconsequential matter, only out of fear. And maybe once or twice he had stolen a plum or penny, but he was no liar, no thief. How he yearned for friendship! How he longed to be in a community with other loving souls again. You are a disgrace to this kingdom. He couldn't forget that cruel sentence spoken by the king. It stuck in his brain. Why did the world go on being so beautiful in spite of the ugliness he had experienced? The lake was beautiful, serenely beautiful. The forest was beautiful, greenly beautiful. Lake and forest, the whole shimmering world was painfully behind. He loved this world, but he was too hurt to enjoy it. The king's scout passed his pattern doorway many times. Peeping out from the cave, Gawain watched them as they beat about in the underbrush and moved on. He recognized every one of them, and sometimes he wanted to rush out and give himself up just to be able to talk again. After several weeks, they no longer appeared. They were looking elsewhere, and with a new purpose. They wanted to find him only to make amends, but Gawain didn't know that. He was beginning to get accustomed to his new environment. He made some improvement in his dwelling. He added a footstool and a carpet he wove out of the rushes. He still bitterly remembered the injustices he had endured, but he gravely went on living, and even managed to enjoy it ever slightly. Had he been able to share his unhappiness with a friend, he would have been happier. With no searching for him now, he was more lonesome, but a bit more relaxed. He still wore the rushes tied to his feet, and he still kept a wary eye, but he stayed longer out of his cave and wandered farther in the daylight, studying things such as the great variety of berries, thinking less about himself. He felt fairly safe. One day, extending his researches into the new corner of his domain, he was surely confronted with a mouse Derek, who emerged from under a large leaf. Gawain was electrified. He had given up the idea of ever again seeing anyone from his past life. Gawain, shouted Derek in his thin, shrill voice. Gawain stood still, fastened to the ground. Derek, he whispered hoarsely, staring at his old friend, amazed. He could still talk after his long silence. What are you doing here? I've been looking for you, said Derek. Gawain laughed, and rather, he made some sounds meant to be laughter. I suppose you are going to subdue me, put me in irons, and bring me back to the justice, he said sarcastically. Oh no, said Derek. The only reason they are still searching for you is that they wanted to ask your forgiveness. The king, everyone, they know it was you. After a measure of silence, Gawain asked, Do they know who it was? No, said Derek. They don't know, but I do. It was me. You? Yes, me, said Derek. How do they know it wasn't I? Asked Derek, staring at her little mouth in astonishment. Because, said Derek, I went on stealing after you flew away to establish your innocence. And he told Gawain the whole story of his thieving without malicious intent, his shock at Gawain's being found guilty at the trial, his wanting to confess and being afraid too, his suffering. Sometimes he stopped to cry, and when he found that he was able to cry more in the presence of one he had wronged than he had been able to by himself, his little body was racked with sobs. Gawain broke down and cried with him, and hot tears coursing down his neck. He felt so many emotions, just at having been vindicated, and at being with Derek, anger at what had happened, misery that such things could happen, pity on Derek, pity for Derek, bitterness towards his faithfulness friends, and toward the king he had loved, longing for a good life, sweetness at thinking how beautiful it could be, and sorrow that it wasn't so. It was all too much for him.